All right, I'm recording now. Let me go back up to where I was. You know what got me thinking about all of that was the lymphatic system. And I didn't even tell you guys like why I was thinking about it. So here's the lymphatic system. Let me it's kind of like like if your blood vessels like arteries and veins and stuff, if we were to call that like the interstate, this would be like a service road. Right? It's like another way to move things around your body. Right? So just like you see like here there's like the inferior vena cava and the descending aorta. You have like this big green thing here and it splits at the legs, just kind of like um, our arteries and veins do. They come up around the shoulder, they go up the neck, kind of similar to arteries and veins. So it's like a side parallel way to transport things throughout the body. This was what got me thinking of that whole thing that I didn't record. The fact that it drains excess interstitial fluid. So you have, as I wrote here, you have more filtration than reabsorption. So fluids moving out of the blood, but not back in as much. So you're going to have extra fluid. If you don't do something about that, you're going to have edema everywhere. So that's one of the functions of the lymphatic system, to drain the excess interstitial fluid. And I'm going to show you in the next slide how. My wife opens the door every morning. It's summer. I don't have to open the door. So I shut off the air conditioner. Then I forget to turn it back on. About this time of day, it's like,
I don't know how y'all forget to turn it back on in Louisiana weather. It's bad.
The door should have been open. That's the original crime. All right. So if you look like at this slide, this is the beginning of the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system moves from like these small capillaries to bigger vessels, and it ends right here, like by the subclavian vein. So it starts small. It's not circular, right? It's not like blood vessels where you go from like an artery and then you eventually go to a vein and then you go back to the heart and then you go back into an artery. It's not circular like that. There's a beginning and there's an end. The beginning of the lymphatic system are lymphatic capillaries. The end of the lymphatic system are what we call lymphatic ducts, DUCT, right? So there's like there's a big lymphatic duct coming up the middle here, and it taps in right there to the subclavian veins. Like you see, was one right here. Not this green thing right here, that's the blood vessel. It's like that darker green that's tapping into that lighter green. I don't know why they colored that green. They should have colored that like blue. But anyway, there's a beginning and there's an end. This is the beginning. So this is lymphatic capillary. And you can kind of see how they're shaped. They're shaped in such, like all these are cells, right? And then all this stuff around the cells is the interstitial fluid, right? So they're shaped in such a way that the fluid can move into these, but not back out, right? So sometimes we call these lacteals. So they move in but not out. So it drains the excess interstitial fluid, very important. Second, it transports lipids. Not only lipids, but things like lipid-soluble vitamins. So when you mess around with fat, you got that? When you mess around with fat, you also have to consider fat-soluble vitamins. And you have to consider other things like fat-soluble hormones. So people that are trying to no-fat diet, I want to get all my body fat out. You have to consider these things as well. Do they want to see me?
Yeah. Do you have any guitars?
No, I don't have anything else. So that's why I put here the lipid soluble vitamins. There's 4 vitamins that are stored in our fat stores. So that's what they are: A, D, E, and K. By the way, the other 2 vitamins are water soluble. It's B and C. But anyway, transports lipids. That's the second function. Third function, involved in immune responses. We're going to talk about immunity. Probably not today. I'll probably go to the end of this. But they're kind of tied in, right? I'm separating them out, but it's really kind of one chapter because the lymphatic system is, like the lymphatic system trains our immune system, and our lymphatic system also sounds like the alarm. So when you get infected with something, your lymphatic system, like your lymph nodes, will often pick up on the fact that you've been infected with something, and it lets your immune system know. So it triggers the immune system, and it provides training for your immune system. That's what I mean by involved in immune responses. But for now, what I have typed here is good enough. This is showing you kind of the end, the bigger vessels. And at the very, so here's how it moves. Let me see if I make sure I don't have it written down somewhere. No, I don't. So you move from lymphatic capillaries to something called lymphatic vessels. And of course, within these lymphatic vessels, we have a bunch of lymph nodes. You have about 600 lymph nodes throughout your body. They tend to be congregated in some places more than others. So like in your neck, your axillary area, your armpits, and guinal area. So lymphatic capillary, lymphatic vessel, lymph nodes, lymphatic trunks, and there's like 5 of those, and then 2 lymphatic ducts. So this is one lymphatic duct. I'm gonna trace it with my pointer. It starts here at this like bulge. So it's called cisterna chyli, and then I'm following it up right now, like this big one that my cursor is following, and it's going up here, and it's going into the left subclavian. So it does tap into your bloodstream, right at the subclavian vein. That's the left duct. That's the end on the left side. The right side's a lot smaller. It starts right here. So we're already like up here, right? So it's just right here. This is the right lymphatic duct. Bam, right there. It starts here and it empties into the right subclavian. Those are the 2 ducts. You have a left duct and a right duct. Then you have trunks. You have different trunks that empty into these ducts. There's 5 different areas, and it all depends on where it's coming from. You see this green arrow, like this one here coming in? These are jugular, named after the jugular vein. These are jugular trunks, and they're labeled somewhere if I can see right here. Right, so these are jugular trunks, the ones that are along your jugular veins. And then the ones along your shoulder, they're called subclavian trunks. So see that green arrow coming in from the shoulder? That's one right there. There's another one right there. So that's the second one, jugular, subclavian. The third one is called bronchomediastinal. It's right, the word is written right here. And it's this arrow right here. I don't know where they're pointing, but it's from this area. Here's the one here. That's part of the duct. The other one's like right here. So the word broncho means lungs. The word mediastinal or mediastinal means that's the cavity that the heart sits in. So we're talking about this area, the thorax. The bronchomediastinal trunk drains the thorax. So we have 3: jugular, subclavian, bronchomediastinal. Fourth, intestinal. So now we're talking about abdomen. Think about where your intestines are. Fifth, lumbar. The lumbar is the lowest part of your back. So the lumbar is going to drain, and they're down here where these arrows are. So that's like lumbar. One of them's lumbar. One of them is intestinal. Who cares which is which? I don't know. But the lumbar is going to drain your legs, your very lower back, pelvis area. Intestinal is going to drain your abdomen. If these types of things make sense to you, then more power to you. They usually don't to me. But all right, so let me go back a little bit, and I'm going to come right back to that. So there's lymphatic vessels here, like here, here, here. Look, here's the right the left lymphatic duct. It's like running up here and dropping into the subclavian. Anyway, there's also organs, and you see there's 3 here. One is the thymus. It sits on top of your heart. One's the spleen, which we've talked about the spleen before, but we consider it a lymphatic organ. And then your bone marrow, considered a lymphatic organ. So spleen, thymus, and red bone marrow. You probably remember red bone marrow and spleen when we talked about blood. The spleen breaks up old red blood cells, and the red bone marrow makes red blood cells, but they also make white blood cells. So we're going to talk about these organs. Any other organs there? Not really. Not anything significant. So we could divide these into primary organs and secondary organs. And primary organs are the, you have, if you remember all the 5 types of T cells, one of the special ones is a lymphocyte. If you were in lab, it was the one that had just like the nucleus was like a circle. So it was like a purple circle. That was the lymphocyte, as opposed to the neutrophil, which had like the 3 or 4 dots, right? So those were both white blood cells. The lymphocyte was the one with like the circle, the bigger circle, purple circle. Anyway, those are special lymphocytes out of the 5 types of blood cells, white blood cells. Lymphocytes are special. They become T cells or B cells. B stands for bone marrow. T stands for thymus, right? So T cells were made in the red bone marrow, but they migrated to the thymus. That was where their boot camp was, their basic training, because they're both soldiers. Just where do you go to basic training, right? The B cells stay in the red bone marrow. That's what the B is for, bone marrow. They stay there. They're born there, but their basic training is also there. Whereas T cells, they're lymphocytes that were born in the red bone marrow, but they go to the thymus for their training. That's where the T comes from. Those are both primary organs. These are places where lymphocytes become immunocompetent, where they learn how to be part of this immune system. Secondary organs, that's the alarm system. That's going to trigger the body and let it know that it's been infected with something. Lymph nodes do that. If you ever notice a doctor feeling up under your neck, they're feeling for swollen lymph nodes, because that means that something passed. If you get like a bacteria or a virus, as it's passing through that lymph node, it's going to trigger. There's lots of T cells and B cells inside of that lymph node. It's going to trigger them and get them going. So it's going to swell. You'll be able to, often you can feel it. Right? And that lets you know that there's an infection. So that's where the immune response starts. Lymph nodes. There's also things called lymphatic nodules. And they're kind of like lymph nodes, except that, really they're the same. But lymph nodes have a capsule around it, and lymphatic nodules don't have a capsule. That's kind of the difference. we'll talk about lymphatic nodules. So lymph nodes, lymphatic nodules, and your spleen, those set off your immune system. So the spleen, it phagocytizes red blood cells. It's got other jobs. It also has lots of white blood cells, T cells, B cells. And if anything doesn't belong in your body, that's one of the organs that's going to like set your immune system off. It's like a filter. Before we get next chapter, before I get into the immune system, because that's really where I'm going to derive most of the questions, and I probably won't get into it today, like the things I'm going to ask you questions about, because I don't want to go over a bunch of stuff that's not going to be on your test. Same thing. Because if I were you, I wouldn't want new material. So I'm just going to go over a couple of ideas. We talked about T cells and B cells. They're specialized lymphocytes. We're going to be discussing these cells when we talk about the immune system. There's actually two types of T cells that we focus on. They're called T4 and T8, but we'll get to that. And then there's B cells. Right, so they're lymphocytes. They're lymphocytes that went to basic training and they became like specialized cells. Microbe is anything that's small that you can't see. It doesn't mean that it's bad. It doesn't mean that it's good. It just means it's small. You got to like put it under a microscope to see it. But a pathogen is a microbe that is harmful to you. You have lots of microbes in your body that are not pathogenic. All those bacteria in your intestines that I was talking about, they're not pathogenic. They're helping you. They're symbiotic. They're symbionts. They're doing things for you. They're microbes, but they're not pathogens. But there's other bacteria that are pathogens, right? They make you sick. So out of the things that make you sick, I've listed 5 things: viruses, bacteria, fungus, protozoa, and then I did a general parasites, right? Viruses and bacteria are going to be the main 2 things that infect you, that infect people. Think about what makes people sick. Vast majority of the time, it's going to be a virus or bacteria. Fungus also infects us. Think about like athlete's foot, ringworm, thrush, if you've ever heard of that. But they're not common, right? They're more opportunistic. They'll come once you've been taken out by something else. Protozoa, if you ever heard of malaria, that's like a protozoa, right? So not so much in this country. And then general parasites, like there's these worms called nematode worms. In Louisiana, there's hookworm. There's like a little pinworm called Enterobius vermicularis. It sometimes infects kids, like it'll go into their feces. Most of these parasites, they stay in your digestive system. But anyway, we don't really we don't see worms or flukes or these types of parasites in us. It's just not a thing we have in this country. Protozoa, hardly ever. Fungus, rarely, but yes, it happens. Bacteria and viruses are your main ones. Viruses, out of all 5 of these, viruses are different in that they might not be living at all. Like there's a debate about whether viruses are living or not, because they're very simplistic. Like all they are is they're either DNA or RNA, and then there's protein coats surrounding them. So they're like really simplistic. They don't have all these things that cells have, Golgi apparatus and ribosomes and lysosomes, whatever. They don't have all that. Right? They're very simple. They attack your body from the inside out, not from the outside in. So we call this exogenous, endogenous. I'll talk about that more next class. But viruses are different. They get into your cell, then they attack. Whereas all the other four, they attack your body from outside the cell to go in. So the last word here, the last term that we're going to talk about is an antigen. So it's something that provokes an immune response. So I was using the example the other day, when our immune system goes to fight something. Oh no, I wasn't using it with you guys. So when our immune system goes to fight something, we don't fight a person, we don't fight a uniform, we're fighting a flag on the uniform. So every uniform that has this country's flag, everything that has this country's flag, you attack it. That's how our body works. So you don't have to show your body the complete coronavirus. Look at the entire virus. You don't have to do that. You could just take a piece, a little protein off of the virus, the coat that the virus is wearing. You could take a protein and show it to us, and we'll develop an immunity to that. So you don't actually have to use the whole thing. So that's an antigen. You're just showing an antigen. That's what a lot of vaccines are. They're just antigens. You're showing antigens. Sometimes they'll take a virus and they'll make it really weak and they'll put that in you. Sometimes they just take the proteins. So there's nothing living. They're just taking proteins and injecting that into you. It's like taking another country's flag and injecting it to you. Right? That's what you're developing the immune system against. So anyway, sometimes I use the word micropathogen, antigen interchangeably, right? But specifically, antigen really is the protein on the pathogen, or it's the protein on anything. Your red blood cells have antigens, right? It's the protein that kind of marks them. So I'm not going to ask you. I mean, really, I'm not going to ask you about this on the test, but maybe just FYI. I was telling you that the thymus is where T cells mature. It's like their boot camp. We're going to talk about these different cells later. Macrophages, that'd be good for you to know. They're cells that eat things. There's two ways to go after things in your body. Either you can attack it directly, take your T cell sword and just stab the shit out of it, or you could try to eat it. And that's what macrophages do. It's like Pac-Man in those, another old reference. But that's like what I think of it. And you just surround it, engulf it, and eat it. That's called phagocytosis. Macrophages or phagocytes, I use the words interchangeably. I don't think that there's like a big difference between them, but that's what they are. They're cells that eat things. T cells are going to go the other way. They got weapons. They're going to go up and kill it. Right. Dendritic cells we'll talk about later. So that's a lymph node. It's like the lymph moves through in one direction. It comes in here and it leaves here. See how there's valves so it doesn't go backwards. You'll see the word afferent and efferent. Well, sometimes they call it like efferent and efferent, but it means afferent is going in and efferent is exiting. E for exit, or A comes before E. That's how you can remember it, right? So you don't just see that with the lymph node. You can see it with other organs, like the kidney. It's got afferent vessels and efferent vessels. Right, so anyway, the lymph moves through here. If there's anything that doesn't belong in this lymph, like a piece of bacteria, it's going to trigger the T cells or the B cells or macrophages. It's going to trigger something, right? So this lymph nodes are going to start the whole immune system process. You don't have to know the parts. That's more of a lab type of thing. Same thing with the spleen. Lymphatic nodules are found often wherever you have a tract, digestive tract, respiratory tract, reproductive tract. You find them right underneath the epithelial tissue. So if you were to take your throat, your esophagus, what's lining your esophagus? The answer should always be epithelial tissue, right? When I say lining of something, you say epithelial, right? But right underneath that epithelial tissue, right underneath those epithelial cells, you're going to find lymphatic nodules here and there. So that if you swallow something, so let's say I eat some old food and it's got like bacteria in it. There's a good chance that that bacteria is going to go all the way down my esophagus and it's going to land in my stomach. My stomach is what? Acidic. So the acid's going to take care of the problem. And I probably I won't know that I ate something that I shouldn't have eaten. That's usually what happens. Sometimes that bacteria will hop off in my esophagus or before it gets to my stomach, and it tries to break through the epithelial cells. Hopefully, these nodules are waiting for it, right? So they'll call it like mucosa associated lymphatic tissue or whatever. Mucosa is another word of saying lining. The lining of your cheeks, mucosa, right? So if you do a COVID test, they do it in your nose, right? They're up in your they're all up in your mucosa. If they were to do it in the back of your throat, they would be all up in your mucosa, right? So that's all of that stuff we call mucosa. Same thing in your stomach, like the lining, we call it mucosa, like mucus, mucosa. That's what that M means. Mucosa associated lymphatic tissue. Anyway, I'm not gonna ask you a test question about this. I'd just like you to know that it's there. This I'm gonna not talk about. This is where we're gonna start on Thursday. I'll start with this this topic. All right, so it's general immunity is just stuff that you get on you every day. You're breathing in pollen. You're going to breathe in pollen today. You're going to breathe in dust mites today. You're going to get bacteria in your food. It's all good. You don't even know it. It's not a big deal. Your body just takes care of it. Getting coronavirus, that's specific. That's not just a few pollen grains that your body's going to take them out and that's it. No, that's a whole different thing. That's specific immunity. Getting the flu is specific. Right? Eating bad food is general. So we'll talk about that next class. So I'll do the whole immune system. All right, so let me close this. Does anyone have any questions?
No.
Let me stop recording. So this lecture, I'm going to put this over on quiz 3, so you could probably ignore it until Thursday. And that's why I didn't get too heavy into it. In fact, I think the only question that I would ask on that is about the functions of the lymphatic system. I mean, I don't really think I'm going to get to a lot of questions from that. I didn't want to give you a lot of material that you had to like also learn. So stick to the end, stick to the heart and blood vessels. That's your test. If you don't have any questions, we'll wrap it up for today.
All righty.
If you have any questions between now and Thursday, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you guys Thursday.
Okay, see you Thursday.
All right, take care.